She walked into a shelter and found her 15-year-old grandson, skeletal, bruised, and terrified to speak her name. 17 years later, that same boy became a trauma surgeon. But one night, the woman who had abandoned him, his own mother, was rushed into his ER, fighting for her life. And he had just 10 minutes to decide whether to save her or let her die. Welcome to Struggling Stories, where real-life-inspired tales reveal the pain, forgiveness, and impossible choices that define humanity. If you believe every heart deserves a second chance, make sure you box subscribe, then hit the bell icon, and stay with us till the end of this story, because tonight's story will break you and rebuild you. My name is Margaret Reed. I'm 71 years old, and there's a part of my life I've never spoken of until now. It's about my grandson, Daniel, a boy who was broken by life, rebuilt by love, and tested by fate. It was a freezing evening when I first saw him. A thin boy sat in the far corner of a shelter, arms wrapped tightly around himself. His cheeks were hollow, his lips cracked, and his eyes— my God, those eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much pain for his age. I whispered softly, "Daniel." He looked up, startled, confused, and afraid. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? The last time I saw him, he was just 6 years old, chasing butterflies in my garden while his mother, my daughter, Lily, laughed on the porch. He stared at me for a long time before whispering in a shaky voice, "Are you here to take me home?" And right there, my heart shattered. I knelt beside him, holding his cold hands in mine. "Yes, sweetheart," I said through tears. "I'm here to take you home." Those 5 words changed both our lives forever. Lily had left home years ago. She was beautiful, reckless, and too young to understand the weight of motherhood. When Daniel was born, she promised she'd raise him on her own, that she didn't need anyone's help, especially mine. For years, I tried to reach her. Letters returned unopened, phone numbers changed, addresses lost. Then silence. Until one night, out of nowhere, the call came from a social worker. "Mrs. Reed," she said, "we found a boy named Daniel in a shelter. He's malnourished, covered in bruises, and says he has no family." My hands trembled as I whispered, "Where is he?" When I arrived, he was barely alive. The social worker told me he'd been passed from one foster home to another after Lily disappeared. Each home worse than the last. One of them used to lock him in a closet for hours as punishment. Another withheld food for days. No one cared. No one asked, so I took him home. The first night, I made him soup. He wouldn't eat until I did. He just watched, waiting. Later, I realized why. He had been punished with food. Beaten if he didn't finish, starved if he cried. I pretended not to notice and ate first, smiling like it was the most normal thing in the world. Slowly, he began to take small bites, glancing at me every few seconds. That's how healing began. One meal at a time. One smile at a time. He didn't talk much. Nights were hard. Sometimes I'd hear him whimpering in his sleep. Once, I found him hiding under the kitchen table, clutching a pillow. He thought someone was coming to hurt him. I sat beside him, whispering softly until he drifted back to sleep. The next morning, he said something that stayed with me forever. "Grandma," he murmured, "you didn't leave last night," and I replied, "I never will, Daniel." Months passed. He began to draw again, small sketches of birds, trees, and sometimes a woman holding a child's hand. I never asked who they were. He needed space, not questions. As years went by, he grew stronger. The fear in his eyes faded, replaced by quiet determination. He started volunteering at a hospital nearby, cleaning floors, arranging supplies, doing whatever he could. One day, I found him watching a doctor treat a patient. His eyes were filled with something I hadn't seen before: hope. That evening at dinner, he said softly, "Grandma, I want to help people." I smiled. "Then you will, my love." He nodded, serious and calm. "I want to be a doctor." And from that moment, his life took a new path. He studied like his life depended on it. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning to find him at his desk, medical books open, lips moving silently as he memorized terms. Sometimes, when he thought I wasn't watching, he'd whisper, "I'll save them. I'll save them all." He graduated high school with top honors, then medical school. He worked day and night, and somehow, through every struggle, he never forgot where he came from. Every success, every exam, every step, he'd look at me and say, "We did it, Grandma." And then came the proudest day of my life. His graduation. He walked onto that stage in a navy blue suit, the same shy smile he'd worn the day I took him home. When they called his name, Dr. Daniel Reed, I stood up, clapping so hard my hands hurt. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I whispered, "You made it, my boy." After the ceremony, he hugged me and said, "Grandma, I wouldn't be here without you." I told him the truth. "You would have found a way, Daniel. You always do. Life after that was peaceful." He became one of the best trauma surgeons in the city. He bought me a little cottage near the ocean, saying, "You deserve peace, Grandma." Every Sunday he'd visit. Same ritual: grilled cheese sandwiches, tea, laughter, and burnt toast. I still burned it on purpose, just to see him roll his eyes and smile. Sometimes we'd talk about Lily. He never called her Mom. He'd just say, "Her." There wasn't anger in his tone anymore, just emptiness. He didn't understand why she left, and truthfully, neither did I. 17 years passed. Life had healed almost every wound. Until one night. It was raining again. Heavy, wild rain that seemed to echo memories I'd long buried. My phone rang close to midnight. My heart sank. "Mrs. Reed?" a voice said. "This is City Hospital. Your grandson's in the ER. You need to come right now." Everything inside me froze. I didn't even grab a coat. The drive felt endless. When I reached the hospital, I saw Daniel standing in the corridor, his white coat stained, his eyes wide and hollow. "Daniel?" I rushed to him. "Are you okay?" He nodded slowly, his lips trembling. "I'm fine, Grandma, but—" He looked toward the trauma room. "She's here," I frowned. "Who?" He swallowed hard. "My mother." My breath caught. "Lily?" He nodded. "They brought her in about 10 minutes ago. Massive internal bleeding. Multiple fractures. They said she might not make it." I felt the world tilt beneath me. My knees weakened. I clutched his arm, whispering, "Then go, Daniel. You can save her." "You have to," but he didn't move. His hands shook. His eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. "She's the reason I almost died, Grandma. She left me to starve, to be beaten, to be forgotten. And now I'm supposed to save her?" His voice cracked on the last word. I could hear the years of pain behind it. "Daniel," I whispered, "you're a doctor. You save lives. That's who you are." He turned away, staring through the glass window at the broken woman lying on the table, pale, helpless, unrecognizable. The same woman who once kissed his forehead and promised never to leave. He whispered so softly I almost missed it. "Do you think she'd save me? If it were me lying there?" I had no answer. He took a deep breath, his jaw tightening. "They said I have 10 minutes to decide whether to operate." The clock on the wall ticked louder than anything else in that room. Rain pounded against the windows like a warning. I could see the battle in his eyes. Duty against hatred. Mercy against memory. And I realized that sometimes the hardest surgeries aren't done with a scalpel. They're done with the heart. 10 minutes. That's all he had. And those 10 minutes would change everything. The rain outside was relentless, hammering against the hospital windows like time itself was trying to remind him it was running out. 10 minutes. That's what they said. 10 minutes to decide if he would save the woman who gave him life. And destroyed it. Daniel stood motionless in the hallway. The fluorescent lights above flickered, making his reflection in the glass look ghostly. His mother lay on the other side. Pale, unrecognizable, her breathing shallow, machines beeping in chaotic rhythm. Inside his chest, his heart wasn't just beating. It was burning. Nurses moved around her quickly. "Dr. Reed, we're ready," one of them said urgently. "We can't wait much longer," he didn't answer. His jaw clenched, eyes locked on the woman behind the glass. His grandmother's voice trembled beside him. "Daniel, you're not that little boy anymore. You're a healer now. You can't let hate guide your hands." He turned to her, tears gathering but refusing to fall. "You think it's that easy, Grandma? You think I can just forget how it felt? The hunger, the bruises, the nights I prayed she'd come back? She never did. Maybe," Margaret whispered softly, "this is your chance to end that pain. Not by forgetting, but by forgiving." Daniel closed his eyes, his fists trembling. "Forgiving isn't the same as saving someone's life." "Sometimes," she said, "it is." The intercom crackled. "Dr. Reed, Trauma Room 1. Immediate decision required," his pulse spiked. He looked through the window one more time, and for a split second, he didn't see the broken woman. He saw the memory of a mother kneeling beside a 6-year-old boy, tying his shoelaces and whispering, "Don't run too far. Danny, I'll always be here." The same lie that echoed through 15 years of silence. And yet, that one memory, so small, so fragile, pierced through every wall he'd built. He exhaled sharply. "Get her prepped," he said at last. The nurse blinked. "Doctor?" He looked up, eyes cold but steady. "I said prep her, now." As he scrubbed in, his reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger. A boy once abandoned. Now a man about to save the very person who abandoned him. His hands shook slightly, but when he touched the surgical gloves, they steadied. He'd done this 1,000 times before, but never like this. The doors to the operating room swung open, and the familiar sterile air greeted him. Machines beeped, nurses murmured, and the anesthesiologist nodded. The world faded into one thing: precision. He stood over her body, staring for a moment that felt like forever. Her face was barely recognizable, but there were traces: the curve of her jaw, the faint scar near her chin, memories of a woman who once sang him lullabies. "Scalpel," he said quietly. The nurse handed it to him, and with that single word, the line between pain and duty disappeared. Inside the OR, time didn't move in minutes. It moved in heartbeats. One wrong move, one delayed reaction, and she'd be gone. He worked quickly, his voice calm. Every instruction sharp and clear. Clamp, suction, pressure here. No, more gauze. His team followed without question, but they could sense the storm behind his calm tone. The bleeding was massive. Internal organs torn, ribs fractured, a punctured lung. It was a miracle she'd even made it this far. As he worked, flashes from his past tore through his mind, like lightning. Lily's laughter, Lily's scream, the sound of a slamming door, the cold nights in foster care, the way she'd left him in that dirty hallway, clutching his toy truck, whispering, "I'll be back soon." She never came back. He blinked the memories away. His hands couldn't afford to shake now. He wasn't that little boy anymore. Halfway through the operation, her heart flatlined. The monitor screamed a flat, piercing tone. "Code Blue!" shouted the nurse. Daniel's stomach dropped. For a split second, everything inside him wanted to stop. He could walk away, just walk away. No one would ever blame him, but he didn't. He grabbed the paddles. "Charge to 200. Doctor, do it." The defibrillator hummed, and he pressed the paddles against her chest. "Clear." Her body jerked violently. No pulse. He did it again. "Clear." Still nothing. Margaret stood outside the glass window, her hands clasped, whispering silent prayers. "Come on," Daniel muttered through gritted teeth. "Don't you dare die now." Third shock. "Clear!" Beep, beep, beep. A heartbeat returned. Weak, but steady. He stepped back, sweat dripping down his temples. His chest rose and fell in deep, uneven breaths. "Stabilize her. Keep her on oxygen. We're not losing her tonight." The team nodded, relief washing through the room. Hours later, Daniel stepped out of the OR. His hair was damp with sweat, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. Margaret stood waiting, tears in her eyes. "She's alive," he said simply. Margaret let out a trembling sigh. "You saved her," he nodded, voice low. "I did my job," but inside, he felt hollow. As he sat down in the corridor, his mind drifted back to her, the woman on that table, his mother. He wondered if she even remembered him. If somewhere, beneath all that pain and addiction and regret, the woman who once kissed his forehead still existed. A nurse approached. "Dr. Reed, the patient's stable, but she's asking for you." His eyes widened slightly. "She's conscious?" The nurse nodded. "Barely. But she keeps saying your name." He froze. Every instinct screamed to walk away, to let her fade into sleep, into guilt, into the consequences of her choices. But his legs moved on their own. He entered the room quietly. The air smelled of antiseptic and rain. She lay there, pale, weak, tubes running from her arms, her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then filled with tears when they found his face. Her lips trembled. "Daniel," he said nothing, just stood there. Tears rolled down her cheeks. You saved me." Her voice was thin, barely a whisper. "I thought I'd never see you again." He clenched his jaw. You wouldn't have. Not if fate hadn't dragged you through my doors, she winced, trying to speak. I know, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you, his tone hardened. You're right. Silence hung heavy in the air. Only the soft beeping of the monitor filled the space between them. She closed her eyes. I tried to come back once, she whispered. Daniel frowned. What? Her voice broke. You were 10. I found you at one of the foster homes. But they wouldn't let me see you. I was a mess. The drugs, the police, the shame. They told me I'd lose you forever if I showed up again. So I left. Because I thought you'd have a better life without me. He stared at her, frozen. His hands trembled at his sides. I wrote letters, she continued weakly. Hundreds. Every birthday, every Christmas. I sent them all to Mom, but she never... Her words faded into coughs. Daniel's eyes widened. Letters? What letters? Margaret stepped quietly into the room, her face pale. She looked at Lily. Then at Daniel, her lips quivered. She's telling the truth. Daniel turned to her, confused. What do you mean? Margaret's voice shook. I never gave them to you. Or to her. I was afraid, Daniel. Afraid she'd come back and ruin your life again. So I kept them hidden. For a moment, the room fell silent. Daniel felt as if the air had been sucked out of his lungs. All these years, he thought his mother had forgotten him. But she hadn't. The anger, the resentment, the nights he cried himself to sleep thinking she didn't care. All built on a lie born of protection. He looked at his grandmother. Tears finally breaking through. You kept her letters? I thought I was saving you, Margaret whispered, sobbing. I didn't want her to hurt you again. Lily's weak voice broke the silence. I deserved your hate, Daniel. Not her, don't blame her. I did enough damage. Daniel stood there between them. One woman who left, and one who lied to protect. Two kinds of love, both flawed, both broken. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He just stood there, staring at the woman who gave him life, and the woman who gave him everything else. And as the rain continued to fall outside, he realized the truth. Sometimes the hardest part of forgiveness isn't forgiving others. It's forgiving yourself for still wanting to love them. Silence has a strange way of screaming the loudest. After that night at the hospital, Daniel changed, not in the way people do after tragedy, but in the quiet, invisible ways that break you from the inside out. He rarely spoke. He still went to work, still saved lives, still smiled for his patients. But his eyes told a story of a man at war with himself. He had saved her, his mother, the woman who had left him for dead. He had chosen to save her life. I remember the first time he told me. He came home past midnight, his scrubs stained with dried blood and rain. I stood by the doorway waiting, my heart pounding. She's stable, he said quietly. I nodded, tears welling. You did the right thing, Danny. He looked up, eyes red, voice trembling. Then why does it feel like I didn't? He turned away, dropped his keys on the counter, and walked to his room without another word. That was the moment I realized. Forgiveness doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it just reopens wounds you thought were healed. The next few weeks were heavy. Laura, his mother, remained in the hospital under critical care. I visited her once. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The doctor said she might not remember much from the accident. I almost hoped she wouldn't. She looked fragile, pale, almost ghost-like. Machines breathed for her, wires ran through her arms, and yet, even unconscious, she looked the same as before, proud, untouchable, selfish. I stood there watching her, my mind replaying the years of pain she had caused, the nights I heard Daniel sobbing in his sleep, the times he flinched at every sound, the way he looked at families, wondering why his own never wanted him, I whispered. You don't deserve his mercy, and yet, mercy had been given. When Laura finally woke up, Daniel wasn't there. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the light, and the first thing she asked the nurse was, "Where's my son?" It was almost poetic. The woman who never wanted to be a mother now desperate to see the son who saved her. The nurse told her he had operated on her, that he had saved her life. Laura broke down crying. I didn't know whether to feel pity or disgust. That evening, Daniel came home later than usual. I was sitting by the window, knitting quietly when he entered. His hands were trembling, his eyes hollow. "She woke up," he whispered. I nodded. "Did you see her?" He shook his head. "No, I couldn't." There was a pause. "A long one?" "The kind that fills a room with the weight of everything unsaid." "I don't know what she wants from me now," he said finally. "She wants to see you," I replied softly. He laughed. A dry, broken sound. "Now she wants to see me. After 17 years. He dropped to the couch, burying his face in his hands. "Grandma, I thought saving her would make me feel better, that it would heal something. But it didn't. It feels like I traded peace for guilt." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel right, but it's still right." He didn't answer. A few days later, Daniel finally went to her room. She was awake, sitting up, eyes swollen from crying. When he entered, she froze. "Danny?" she whispered, as if afraid to say his name. He stood by the door, stiff, distant. "Mrs. Hill," he said formally. "I am your surgeon." "You're recovering well," her lips quivered. "Please." "Don't call me that." He didn't move closer. Didn't soften. "You shouldn't talk much. You need rest." Tears rolled down her face. "I don't need rest. I need my son." That's when his mask cracked. Just for a second. He clenched his jaw, looked away, and whispered, "You lost that right a long time ago." She sobbed, reaching out weakly. "I made mistakes. I was young, stupid. You were cruel," he cut in sharply. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You left me to starve." His voice trembled with years of buried pain. "Do you know what it's like to sleep on a floor every night, scared to close your eyes because you don't know if you'll wake up? To think no one in this world cares if you live or die?" She couldn't answer. She just cried. "I saved your life," he continued, "not because you deserve it, but because I promised myself I'd never be like you." He turned to leave, but before walking out, he stopped. "You'll live. That's your punishment." That night, Daniel didn't come home. He stayed at the hospital till morning, working nonstop, one emergency after another. His colleagues said he was the calmest surgeon they'd ever seen, but I knew the truth. He wasn't calm. He was empty. When he finally walked in the next morning, his shoulders slumped, his face gray, I said nothing. I just hugged him. He didn't hug back. He just whispered, "I think I've lost myself somewhere between hate and forgiveness." Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Laura was discharged. She tried reaching Daniel multiple times, letters, calls, even coming to the hospital. He avoided her every time. He couldn't face her again. Until one day she showed up at our doorstep. It was raining again, just like the night I found Daniel years ago. She stood there drenched, holding a small box in her hands. "Please, Margaret," she said softly. "Let me see him." Just once, I hesitated. Every instinct in me screamed no. But I saw something in her eyes. Not arrogance, not excuses, just a tired, desperate kind of regret. I let her in. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee. When he saw her, his expression hardened instantly. He stood up. "What are you doing here?" She stepped forward slowly. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it." He crossed his arms. "Then why are you here?" She placed the box on the table. "Because there's something you never knew." Inside the box was a small stack of letters, yellowed, torn, never opened. "These were for you," she said, voice trembling. "I wrote them after I left, every month for 2 years. But I could never send them. I was too ashamed." He stared at the box for a long time. Then he said coldly, "And what difference would they have made?" "Maybe none," she whispered. "But I wanted you to know, I never stopped thinking about you. I wasn't a mother. I was a coward. And I will live with that every day." Tears filled her eyes. "You saved me, Daniel. You gave me a chance to live again. I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful. That's all I came to say." She turned and walked out before he could respond. Daniel didn't touch the box for days. It just sat there on the counter, untouched, like a wound he didn't want to reopen. Then one night, I heard a sound. Soft sobbing from the kitchen. He was sitting there, letters spread across the table, his face buried in his hands. I walked over quietly, and he looked up, eyes red. Voice breaking. She did write them, Grandma. She did. He handed me one. The paper was smudged, the handwriting shaky. I know you hate me. You should. I hate myself too. But if you ever see this one day, know that I love you. Even if I never learned how to show it. Daniel wiped his tears. Why does forgiveness hurt more than anger? I had no answer because maybe forgiveness isn't about peace. It's about pain that finally finds its place. That night, Daniel burned the letters in the fireplace, one by one, not out of hatred, but release. He stood silently, watching the ashes rise, and whispered, "Goodbye, Mom." For the first time in years, I saw his shoulders relax, like he had finally let go of a ghost that had been haunting him since childhood. Sometimes, love doesn't return the way we give it. Sometimes, the people who break us are the same ones who teach us how strong we can be. And sometimes, saving someone's life isn't about healing them. It's about freeing yourself. Daniel never spoke of her again after that. But every year on the same date, I'd find a single white flower left on the hospital's chapel altar. No note, no name, and I knew. He hadn't forgotten. He had forgiven. Quietly, painfully, completely. Forgiveness is a strange thing. It gives peace to the heart, but leaves scars on the soul. Months had passed since Daniel burned those letters. The box was gone. The ashes were swept away. But something about him remained quiet. Too quiet. He laughed more with his patients now, volunteered for extra shifts, helped new interns. But behind that calm face, I could still see the emptiness. Sometimes he would stand by the window late at night, staring into nothing. I would ask, "You can't sleep again?" He'd just smile faintly and say, "I'm okay, Grandma." But I knew he wasn't. One evening, while I was watering the plants, I heard the phone ring. Daniel answered it, and I noticed the color drain from his face. After a pause, he said, "What hospital?" Then he hung up and stood frozen, the phone still in his hand. I asked, "Who was it?" He turned slowly, eyes distant. "It's her. Mom's in the ICU again." My breath caught. "What happened?" "Liver failure," he whispered. "They said it's terminal." We drove to the city hospital in silence. The same place where he had once saved her life was now where she was dying. Life had come full circle. Cruel, poetic, and unbearably painful. When we reached, the nurse recognized him immediately. "Dr. Hill, she's been asking for you." He didn't respond. He just walked down the hallway, the sound of his footsteps echoing like a heartbeat. Inside the room, Laura lay pale and frail, her skin paper-thin, her breathing shallow. Tubes surrounded her again, but this time there was no strength in her eyes, only acceptance. When Daniel entered, she looked up weakly and smiled. "You came." He stood at the foot of her bed, hands trembling slightly. "You're sick," he said softly. She nodded. "The doctors told me. It's my punishment, I suppose." He took a deep breath. "You should have called earlier." She smiled faintly. "Would you have come?" He didn't answer. I stood by the door quietly, watching them. It was strange. How two people who had shared so much pain could still look at each other with love buried beneath all the hurt. Laura reached out her hand, voice weak. "Daniel, I know you have no reason to forgive me. I hurt you in ways I can't undo. But before I go, I need to tell you why." He hesitated, then slowly sat down beside her. She looked at the ceiling as if talking to the past. "When I had you, I wasn't ready. I was scared, not of you, but of myself. I thought I'd ruin you. Every man I loved left me, and I thought you would too one day. So I ran first." She coughed weakly, her voice trembling. "It doesn't make sense, does it? But that's what fear does. It makes you cruel." Daniel looked down, eyes glistening. "You didn't just run, Mom. You erased me." She closed her eyes. "I know. And I've spent every day trying to forget that I did." A long silence followed. Then she said, "You saved me once. I don't deserve to ask you again, but I don't want to die alone." Daniel froze. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Would you stay? Just for a little while?" He sat still for a moment, the little boy in him fighting with the man he'd become. Then slowly he reached out and held her hand. Her skin was cold, her fingers weak. But the moment their hands touched, her breathing eased, her face softened. I forgive you, he whispered. Her eyes widened, and a faint smile spread across her face. You shouldn't, he shook his head. It's not for you. It's for me. She closed her eyes again, whispering, Thank you, my son. That night, Daniel didn't leave her side. He sat there for hours, listening to the machines, the rain outside tapping softly against the window. Every now and then, she'd open her eyes just to make sure he was still there. At dawn, her pulse began to fade. She looked at him one last time. You grew up to be everything I wasn't. He leaned closer, tears streaming silently. And I couldn't have been without you. Even the broken version of you taught me how to survive. She smiled faintly. Tell your grandma I'm sorry. And then, she was gone. When I walked into the room a few minutes later, Daniel was sitting there, her hand still in his. He didn't cry. He didn't move. He just whispered, She's gone. I placed my hand on his shoulder, and for a long time we sat in silence. Sometimes there are no words for endings. Just quiet acceptance. The funeral was small. No relatives, no friends, just the two of us and a few of Daniel's colleagues. As the coffin was lowered, Daniel placed a single white flower on it, the same kind he used to leave in the chapel. He didn't give a long speech. He just said she made mistakes, but she tried. And that's all any of us can do. When it was over, he turned and walked away without looking back. Days passed, and life tried to return to normal. But grief has its own rhythm. It comes and goes like waves, catching you off guard when you least expect it. One evening, I found Daniel sitting in the garden, staring at the sunset. He looked peaceful for the first time in years. I've been thinking, he said quietly. All this time I thought forgiveness was weakness, but it's not. It's freedom, he smiled faintly. I don't hate her anymore, Grandma. I don't hate anyone, I nodded, holding back tears. You've done what few can do, my dear. You've turned pain into purpose. He turned to me, his voice soft. You know, I always thought she was my curse, but maybe she was my lesson. Weeks later, Daniel received a letter in the mail. It was from the hospital's legal department. Inside was a will, handwritten by Laura before she died. She had donated all her remaining savings, small as they were, to a children's shelter. At the bottom, she had written, To the boy I left behind, I couldn't be the mother you deserved, but maybe this way, I can help other children find what I couldn't give. Laura Hill. Daniel read it silently, then smiled through tears. She finally did something right, he said softly. That night, he visited the same shelter he had once lived in as a boy. He walked through the halls, now renovated and bright, with laughter echoing in every corner. A little boy ran up to him, clutching a toy car. Are you a doctor? The boy asked. Daniel smiled. Yes, I'm a doctor. The boy grinned. I want to be one too. He knelt down and said, Then promise me something, no matter how hard it gets. Never stop believing that you can be. The boy nodded eagerly. As Daniel stood and looked around, he realized something as life had come full circle again, but this time not in pain, in purpose. He had broken the chain. He had rewritten his story. That night, as we sat together watching the rain, he said something I'll never forget. You know, Grandma, he whispered, for years I asked why she did what she did. But maybe the answer doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I didn't become her. I smiled and held his hand. No, Danny, you became better. He looked at me and said softly, Do you think she's at peace now? I nodded. Because you gave her that peace. He closed his eyes, a single tear rolling down his cheek. Then maybe we both are. And for the first time in 17 years, the rain didn't sound like sadness anymore. It sounded like healing. Time doesn't heal everything. It simply teaches us how to live with what hurts. A year had passed since Laura's death. The house felt quieter now, not in a lonely way, but in the calm that follows a long storm. Daniel had changed, completely. There was a gentleness in his voice, a steadiness in his eyes that wasn't there before. He had learned to live not with hate, but with understanding. He had started a foundation in his mother's name, the Laura Hill Trust for Lost Children. It helped orphans, runaways, and kids who had been abandoned, giving them shelter, education, and most importantly, hope. when I saw the first banner outside the hospital. Every child deserves a chance to heal. I couldn't stop the tears. Because that was Daniel's message to the world, carved out of his own pain. One afternoon, while sorting through some old papers, Daniel found a small photo, a picture of his mother when she was young, holding him as a baby. The edges were faded, the colors nearly gone, but you could still see it, the tenderness in her smile. He brought it to me quietly and said, "She did love me once, didn't she?" I looked at the picture for a long time before replying, "Yes, she just didn't know how to keep that love alive." He nodded slowly, as if that answer was enough. That night, he framed the photo and placed it in his office, right above his desk. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a symbol of forgiveness. The following months were busy. His foundation began to grow, gaining support from donors, hospitals, and volunteers. Every child he helped, he saw a reflection of himself, the scared boy he once was, and the stronger man he became. But even as he helped others, a quiet thought began to grow in him. Something unfinished, something still waiting. One evening, while sitting on the porch, he said, "Grandma, I think it's time I tell my story." I looked at him, surprised. "To the public?" He nodded. "Yes, maybe if people know what happened, it'll help someone else forgive too." I smiled softly. "Then tell it, Danny. Tell it with honesty, the kind that hurts but heals." A few weeks later, he stood on a small stage at a charity event, facing a crowd of people. Cameras flashed, microphones buzzed, and yet, he looked calm, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all his life. He began simply, "My name is Daniel Hill. I'm a trauma surgeon, and I was once a broken child." The hall went silent. He spoke for nearly an hour, about abandonment, pain, survival, and the difficult beauty of forgiveness. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He talked about his mother, his grandmother, and the night he had to choose between saving her life or letting her die. "When I held that scalpel," he said, "I wasn't just holding her life. I was holding every memory, every scar, every moment of fear I'd ever lived through. But I chose to save her, not because she earned it, but because I refused to let hate decide who I'd become." When he finished, the entire hall stood up in silence, and then, slowly, applause filled the room, not loud, but deep, emotional. People cried. Some hugged strangers. Others just stood quietly, as if they'd witnessed something sacred. Afterward, a woman from the audience approached him. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "My son hasn't spoken to me in years," she said, eyes full of tears. "But after hearing you, I think I'll try again." Daniel smiled softly. "It's never too late." That night, he came home, and I could see something new in his eyes. Peace. Not the fragile kind that breaks, but the kind that comes from acceptance. He sat beside me and said, "You know, Grandma, I always thought my story was about pain, but now I see it's about love. Messy, broken, undeserved love, the kind that still survives." I took his hand and whispered, "That's what life is, my dear. Learning to love even when it hurts." Months passed. Seasons changed. One morning, Daniel got a letter from a young woman named Sophie Turner, a nurse at a small rural clinic. She had grown up in the same shelter Daniel once lived in. She wrote, "Your story changed my life. I'm studying medicine now, because if you could turn pain into purpose, maybe I can too." Daniel smiled reading it. "She's the first of many," he said, and I knew he was right. His story was spreading, touching lives beyond what he could ever see. As years rolled by, his foundation became a beacon for thousands. Children who had once known only fear now dreamed freely. Daniel often visited them, spending hours talking, laughing, teaching them how to stitch a small wound or how to listen to a heartbeat. He never told them he was once like them. He didn't have to. They could see it in his eyes, in the way he listened, in the way he cared. One winter evening, I found him sitting in his office, staring out the window as snow fell softly outside. He turned to me and said, "I've been thinking about her again." "Your mother?" I asked. He nodded. "Do you think she knows what I'm doing?" I smiled gently. If souls can see the world they left behind, then yes, she's watching. Proud and maybe a little sorry. He looked down and whispered, "That's all I ever wanted." Years later, when I grew old and weaker, Daniel took care of me the same way I once cared for him. He made me tea every night, read to me when my eyesight dimmed, and never left my side. Sometimes, he'd joke, "You saved me once. Now it's my turn," and I would laugh softly and say, "You already did, my dear. Long ago." One evening, as I rested in my chair, he sat beside me with a journal in his hand. "I've written something," he said. "For the world, for her, for you." He opened it and began to read, his voice calm, warm, filled with quiet power. "We are all born into stories we didn't choose. Some of us inherit pain, others guilt, some both. But what defines us isn't what broke us. It's what we build from the pieces. My mother broke me. My grandmother rebuilt me. And in between the breaking and rebuilding, I found the meaning of love, not the perfect kind, but the kind that forgives, the kind that endures, the kind that stays even when it shouldn't. If you're listening to this and you're lost, remember, you can start again. Even if no one believes in you, even if you've been abandoned, even if your heart still trembles when you remember the past, you can still choose to heal, because healing isn't about forgetting. It's about finally being able to remember without pain. When he finished, I couldn't speak. Tears filled my eyes, and I simply whispered, "That's beautiful." "Danny," he smiled faintly. "It's our story." Years later, after I was gone, Daniel continued to grow, not in fame, but in legacy. The foundation spread across countries. Thousands of children found homes, families, futures, and every year, on the same date, the day his mother died, Daniel would visit her grave. He'd stand silently, place a single white flower, and whisper, "I forgive you." Then he'd walk away, not in sadness, but with peace. One cold autumn morning, many years later, Daniel passed away in his sleep, peacefully, quietly, with that same calm expression he always carried. At his funeral, hundreds of children, now grown adults, came to say goodbye. Doctors, nurses, students, orphans, all touched by his story. Someone read from his journal at the ceremony. The last words he ever wrote were these: "If my story has taught you anything, let it be this: you are not what was done to you. You are what you choose to become." And so, the boy who was once abandoned became the man who saved others. The son who once cried for love became the father figure to hundreds. The child who once felt unworthy taught the world the purest form of grace, forgiveness. Didn't just save his mother's life, saved his own. And as the rain began to fall softly that day, just like the night it all began, it didn't sound like sorrow anymore. It sounded like peace.